recognize everyone. Thank you, everyone, for being here. Today, the chief and I wanted to share some of what we're doing in Seattle to lead the nation in reimagining public safety and in investing in our community. After meeting with community leaders and organizations, demonstrators, business, and residents of Seattle in the last 3 weeks, and hearing many demands for change, I wanted to share an update on what actions the city is taking in response to community to address the systemic inequities in Seattle. We will be investing in Black communities, investing in young people, rethinking and reimagining policing, including our culture and budgets. We will have accountability and reform measures, including statewide reforms of police unions. Across the city, hundreds of thousands have gathered at different days and different events. At least one event had approximately 85,000 people who marched silently, in solidarity, and peacefully. And though they were silent, their message was strong and loud and clear. For nearly 2 weeks, people have been gathering on Capitol Hill. Many are there to continue their protests, to build community and demand change. Over the days, tens of thousands of people have peacefully gathered or visited Capitol Hill. During the day, there have been no major incidents, but we know it is very different at night, particularly in recent nights. The cumulative impacts of the gatherings and protests and the nighttime atmosphere and violence has led to increasingly difficult circumstances for our businesses and residents. Most of them supported protesters right to gather at the outset. They stand with them in solidarity, but the impacts have increased and the safety has decreased. Both on Saturday morning and last night, there were incidents of gun violence, and that escalating violence concerns me, Chief Best, residents, businesses, and the greater community. All of Capitol Hill has been impacted. No violence is acceptable, and we have worked hard to address gun violence in our city, particularly youth violence. Yet Saturday, a 19-year-old tragically lost his life to gun violence. As a mother of a 19-year-old boy, I cannot imagine the pain of his mother and his family. We must do better here and in Seattle and across the country. Just in the last few days, we have witnessed that it is a violent time in our nation. Just this weekend, 2 people were killed and 17 wounded in Charlotte. 1 was killed and 11 wounded in Minneapolis. 13 dead and 106 wounded in Chicago. The previous weekend, 4 killed and 15 wounded in 12 different shootings in New Orleans. The hurt continues. Seattle demands that I do better, the chief do better, and that we do better, and we agree. I will let Chief Best address what they're doing in those cases and those investigations. But we've heard from people on Capitol Hill and across the city that the gun violence unfolding at night is not only wrong, it also is undermining and distracting from the message for change that we are hearing in the street and in so many of the peaceful protests. It is not unnoticed that the victims were Black men at a time we're called upon and working to dismantle the racist systems that disproportionately affect Black Americans, particularly Black men. While we believe individuals, organizations, and others can continue to gather on Capitol Hill peacefully, the continued disorder, the violence, and the impacts on residents and businesses are not just at odds with the message of justice and equity, They cannot continue to occur. We are working with community to bring this to an end. Capitol Hill belongs to everyone in this city, and it is of deep, deep importance to the LGBTQ community, particularly during June, the month of Pride. Businesses need to open. Many of them have barely survived the COVID shutdown, and they and their employees are ready to get back to work, and they should be allowed to do so. The organizers at Capitol Hill have concluded that they should not gather overnight. We need to disrupt the cycle of violence. In recent days, we have deployed community resources to both de-escalate the area and to move people to services. We will continue working with and deploying these community organizations to change the circumstances on Capitol Hill. We have heard many over the last 2 weeks say that we as a city need to respond to community with community-based solutions, not always police. That's why we are engaging those partners now, like Not This Time, Community Passageways, and other Black-led organizations. I am hopeful and confident that these organizations that we are in dialogue with and others will work to encourage individuals to leave voluntarily, and we're working with those organizations and community leaders to resolve that situation. Our Human Services Department is also setting in place officers of services for those individuals experiencing homelessness in the area, so we can move them to a better and safer place. But the city will not allow for gun violence to continue in the evenings around Capitol Hill. And if individuals continue to remain at the park, we will be looking at additional steps to ensure community safety. All the residents, businesses, and leaders here today are aligned that we cannot let acts of violence define this movement for change. We also need to open Capitol Hill, Cal Anderson Park, and those blocks for businesses, employees, visitors, and residents. The call for change comes at a time when Seattle is witnessing the convergence of 3 major crises: a global pandemic that continues, a financial downturn that has impacted so many, and institutional racism, all of which disproportionately affect people of color, particularly Black Americans. This week, I will be going to the City Council with my 2020 budget rebalancing plan that reflects the hundreds of millions of dollars that the city will spend on COVID-19 relief, but it will also make new investments in community. As I present my updated 2020 budget this week and prepare next year's 21 budget in the coming months, these are my priorities for community safety. First, investing in Black and marginalized communities. True public safety does not come just from police. For the last year, we have been working to have better systems in place to build more resilience and more strengths in community, and we will continue to do that. One concrete way we want to make sure that communities know they have a place in Seattle is to help them build wealth and return legacy properties to them. We have been working for some time to transfer Bird Bar Place and the Central Area Senior Center and Fire Station in the Central District to the community. We will expedite that process so that people can be rooted in their community. King County Equity Now says the process has been too long, and process is part of the problem. Our process always disadvantages certain communities. I agree, so we will expedite those transfers. We will also invest in young people and youth opportunity. We want to give everything from free college to preschool to transit passes. We cannot achieve justice unless we have educational justice. As part of my budget this week, I will be committing another $5 million for mentoring and summer learning for Black youth. We also have to continue to look at police accountability and reform, and not just in Seattle, but statewide. A key to this will be reforming some of the union rights in state law. I'll be sharing more about this in the coming week, but we also know we have to rethink and reimagine policing, including our culture and budget. We have talked a lot about that, the chief and I, and others in community. And we know there are so many calls that police get that they respond because the other systems in society have failed. We had over 17,000 crisis calls the Seattle Police Department responded to last year. We need to build a system where those calls never have to be made, or when they are made, we can have first a person with mental health training or de-escalation training or community-based deal with those. We are asking police officers more and more to deal with all of the problems that society has created by underfunding the things we need to do to have a strong society. Part of rethinking police should also be on the long-term plans, not just for the East Precinct, but for the areas around it on Capitol Hill. And also by how police and community resources are presented in the community. We know that we need to have a true community space with connections to community-based organizations, health clinics, restorative justice programs that work hand in hand with the chief and her officers. Capitol Hill has always been the epicenter of justice and change and reflects individuals and the communities there most impacted by policing. Like all of Seattle, Capitol Hill is the ancestral lands of the Duwamish people, but for decades it has also been a refuge for the LGBTQ community. That's where we centered our fight for equality and where we found sanctuary. Cal Anderson Park is named for the first gay legislator who in the 1990s every year sponsored a bill to give protections to gays and was never successful. It was not until last week in 2020 that the Supreme Court finally made it the law of the land and extended non-discrimination laws to LGBTQ community. But at the same time, Capitol Hill is the gateway to the Central District, the historic heart of the Black community in Seattle. But it is a historic heart that they can no longer call home. When I grew up here, the community was 75% Black. Today it is less than 14% Black. Their history, their homes, their ties to community have been erased, and we must work to reestablish that. I am working with Black leaders on a plan to create a space on Capitol Hill to support community voices in rethinking and reimagining policing and on the greater investments we know we must make to really dismantle our systemic racism. These conversations are ongoing and must be led by the community themselves. I hope to have more to share on this soon. In addition, I will say that in some of the conversations we had, Black Lives Matter, Seattle King County has made it clear that they support Reverend Walden, who is here today, and her leadership in helping determine the long-term future of the East Precinct for the Seattle Police Department. The history of that precinct is rooted in Black-led organizing, and I will let her describe that more, but we will also be including in the budget additional resources for community engagement on policing and community ahead of my 2021 budget. I want to make sure that I support and give Chief Best everything she needs as she leads this dialogue with community on how to reimagining policing and how to have it live up to her vision of what community and police do together. But Chief Best has made it clear to me that for the short term, SPD will need the East Precinct to appropriately respond to more than 100,000 911 calls. SPD will be returning to the East Precinct. We will do it peacefully and in the near future. I'll let Chief Best talk about that further. But it is clear, while the physical space is important, we are going to focus our greatest efforts on reimagining policing itself. This means we can no longer have police be the first responders to deal with every call for help. It means deploying the right person with the right skills in the right situation, like mental health specialists, domestic violence counselors, or addiction counselors. There are times when police have to be the ones responding, but they will tell you there are times when it would be best to have others on the ground first. We have created new programs in Seattle to redirect and reduce our 911 calls for service, including the Seattle Fire Department's Health One services, which is a mobile medical clinic that addresses low acuity situations, and we added nurses to homeless shelters. Just want to emphasize that again. Time and time again, we saw that in the downtown core, there were people with mental health and behavioral health challenges that people would call the police because they were causing a disturbance. But the police usually have only one response. If they take someone as either to Harborview or the jail, and we have seen the cycle of that creates. When it's the fire department in Health One, a trained medic and a social worker respond to get the person stabilized, to get them the help they need, and to reduce the need for police. We will expand on programs like this. Reimagining policing also requires accountability. Decades of work here led to the creation of our accountability system, including OPA, OIG, and the CPC. These independent oversight entities were designed to give community and civilian accountability to SPD. We must support them and give them the resources they need and allow them to do their jobs. Community also has asked for a greater role in guiding the next contract with SPD officers. I agree that this is key, and we are continuing to have dialogue on how to make this commitment meaningful and real. Together, we will reimagine policing and public safety, and we will invest in communities who have been left behind for far too long. A vision for a new era of police and community resilience won't end with these proposals. We must also fundamentally reform every other component of our society, our tax system, access to healthcare, education, among others. And that work is underway. Racism is a living, breathing organism. It permeates our society in so many ways. And we can only undo racism and begin to undo the trauma and injustice by really centering the voices of the people who are affected. As much as I wish there could be an immediate end to all of these issues, there is not. This city and cities like us across the country are all grappling with the same realities. We have had hundreds of years of systemic injustice. It will not be undone in a day or in any one city. But yet, we must try. And we must try to start putting in real and meaningful changes so that we can build generational and legacy change for all of the children in Seattle. I would like to ask all of the city to join us in this, to move forward, to reimagine this together, and to show that Seattle can lead the nation in a way to take what are difficult and challenging and generational inequities and issues and find a way to make our city and our country better. Thank you very much, and now I'll turn it over to Chief Best.
Great, thank you so much, Mayor. Before I begin, I just want to tell you how honored I am to stand with so many wonderful and distinguished community members and people who support public safety. First, Chief Harold Scoggins, who has been, relentless and untiring in all your efforts, a wonderful partner in community safety, and I feel, just honored to acknowledge the work that you've done and continue to do on behalf of the city. We have Victoria Beach, who is the president of our African American Advisory Council, Dr. Reverend Carey Anderson from First A.M.E., Reverend Walden, who many of you know is a community activist, Hisham Farajala from the Idris Mosque, a longtime supporter and person of great compassion and care. We also have Andre Taylor from Not This Time. Many of you will recognize and know him. Elise Chernin from the GSBA, a wonderful leader there, and also a long supporter of public safety. Bishop Gary Tyson, again, another person who has been a long supporter of public safety, policing, and cares very deeply and very greatly about this community and everything that happens in it. And then lastly but not leastly, Dr. Sheila Edwards-Lang, I'm saying that, Lang, if I say that correctly, who has also been a longtime community supporter. We have people here standing with us today who have a long history of giving their time, their effort, and their lifeblood to the safety of the city of Seattle. For those community members who were not able to join us today, I thank all of you for your continued support of your Seattle Police Department. But we cannot move forward as a community, as a city, or a police department unless all of us are working together. I would like to provide first a recap of this weekend's events and then move on to what the mayor talked about re-envisioning and reimagining policing in the future, and Seattle leading the way on that. So 3 people were shot in the course of 48 hours in Capitol Hill, in the area known as the CHOP. The first shooting happened early Saturday morning. A 19-year-old man was killed, and a 33-year-old man still remains hospitalized in critical condition. Last night, gunfire erupted again, and a teenager was shot in the arm. SPD officers responded to all of these incidents, and on Saturday night, upon entering the CHOP, they were met with a hostile crowd that prevented them from getting to the victims. Because we couldn't guarantee the safety for the first responders to enter, neither officers or medics were able to get there and treat the wounded. And yes, there are countless individuals who are in the CHOP that are there to engage, as the mayor said earlier, in peaceful demonstrations. But there are also groups of individuals engaging in shootings, a rape, assaults, burglary, arson, and property destruction. And I have the police reports right here. I'm not making it up. These things have happened. We cannot walk away from the truth of what is happening there. This is not about politics, and I'm not a politician. This isn't a debate about First Amendment rights. This is about life or death. So we need a plan. The council legislated away officers' access to less lethal tools, when in fact we had in place a temporary restraining order by Judge Jones, and we would ask and hope that they would reconsider and make our ability to respond to these incidents and use the appropriate tools available to us. No one, especially the officers, want to be in a situation where they have to use any other option. The only options left to us, which actually ends up being, our batons or a gun, neither of which are the appropriate response to the situations that we're seeing up on the Hill. The Seattle Police Department spent years developing the gold standard of use of force policy. It was done in coordination with the Federal Monitor, the Department of Justice, and the federal court. Let that work and oversight process allow us to use these tools when absolutely necessary, as the judge has defined. I cannot stand by not another second and watch another Black man, or anyone really, die in our streets while people aggressively thwart the efforts of police and other first responders from rescuing them. A life might have been saved if not for the circumstances created by hasty legislation. I wanted this job. It's no secret. I love the job. I love being the police chief. I care deeply about the community, but we need the council and others to support us and assist us in preventing further loss of life. There has to be an end to the chaos that has been celebrated by some. I talk to people in that community all the time. They are telling me it's getting worse every single day. And I know as well as anybody that Black Lives Matter and Black Lives Matter Seattle King County has made it clear that the council needs to allow community-led leadership, as the mayor talked about, community-led leadership to lead the process. The lives of the Black community should not be caught up in political posturing, maneuvering, and pandering. I know Mayor Durkan stands with me and supports me. We are both champions of police reform, and we need the council to join in that work instead of focusing on how best to lay off city employees. I also have to stand up for the men and women of the Seattle Police Department. Our officers need to get back in that East Precinct. Before I close, I want to look to tomorrow to next week, and to next year. We all know that policing is never going to be the same as it was, not in the nation, not in our state, and not in our city. It can't be, and it shouldn't be. We have to make change. We have to re-envision and reimagine how we're going to move forward. And as the mayor said, it has to be community-led, hand in hand, working with the very people that we're serving. First and foremost, the Seattle Police Department commits to joining our community. Community must not just advise us, they must lead us. We are also weeks into a process critically examining what we will ask our officers to do every day and whether they need to do it. So much has been placed on them because of failures in other systems, and the mayor talked about it earlier. 16,995 crisis calls. That's how many cops responded to in an 18-month period. So maybe there is a better way to have a different response from a different institution or a different level of service that can be provided. We're open to all of that. Again, community-led. And in our new model of policing and community safety, the entire structure and mission of the Seattle Police Department has to be reimagined and re-envisioned. And it will be done with direct community guidance. We'll be looking to the community to come to us and talk to us person to person, face to face, to make sure that we're initiating the steps that the community wants to see. These are the initial steps. You know, I used to run track. You know, that was a long time ago, but I did. And you know, you have to warm up first. But I intend for this to be both a sprint to address our critical immediate needs and a marathon for our continuous improvement under this new paradigm shift led by the Seattle Police Department and the Mayor's Office. Seattle PD is releasing additional notes on this, but we need and we will do this with community. Thank you.
Good afternoon. Wow, all I can say is wow. World is turned. I'm here, I actually speaking for history because that's what I love. I'm also here to support Chief Best in getting back into the East Precinct. I mean, I really and truly, East Precinct came about because of Sam Smith. He was the first African-American person elected to the City Council, and that's where the City Council worked differently. It was no districts then. And so when a council person was elected then, they had to serve the whole city. I mean, people might want to research that and go and look at the archives and see how things got done and compare that. You might want to do something about that. But that's not what I'm here to talk about. I'm here to talk about what leadership is and what leadership looked like when Sam Smith was here. I was the first person. Sam Smith got elected, and then he started in 1977, actually talking about the East. It was no precinct in East, okay? No precinct at all. Calls for service to the central area took like 45 minutes, and in some cases they had to say a white woman was hurt and told to get somebody over there. That's what it looks like. And so I'm here to say that the history about this is necessary. It's actually it was actually put there for the Central District. That's what it was. That precinct was there to serve the Central District. But today it serves 100,000 people from south of the Mount Lake Cut all the way to I-90, all the way to Massachusetts. That's where the cutoff for I-90 is. It serves all of Madison Valley, all of Madison Park, Leschi, Madrona, the ID, all the way down to the lake. That's what that precinct does, and we have a debt of gratitude for Sam Smith, and he was courageous. And you know what Sam Smith would do? His door was always open, and he would have his lunch back. Anybody could come and sit with him and have lunch with Sam Smith. And you know how he greeted everyone? He said, "How you doing, neighbor?" So that's my new saying now. I'm saying, "How you doing, neighbor? Let's turn this around here." Okay, that's what leadership is. Let's lead here and let's turn it around. East Precinct needs to be open. The guys need to be in there doing the work. And I know I'm gonna take a lot of heat. People say, "I thought she was against the police." You know, I'm for equity. I'm for justice, and I think we need to do both and. We need to get it open, and then we need to look at reimagining policing, look at the resources, but we have to be willing to do both and in a world so a world can work. Thank you.
To Mayor Durkan, Chief Best, Chief Scoggins, to my community partners that's standing here with us today, and to you, my brothers and sisters, I am Pastor Carey Anderson of First A.M.E. Church in Seattle, Washington, which happens to be on 14th Avenue between Pine on the north and Pike on the south, right in the Capitol Hill area. Our church has been there since 1886. I'm reminded of theologian and author Jim Wallace, who said, to find common ground, we must first move to higher ground. This is a conversation that we must engage in today to move to the ideal of common ground by moving to a higher ground. With those who are a part of the CHOP family and the CHOP community, I stand here to say that I agree with some of the principles that you stand for. I agree with the right to protest. I agree that you exercise the right to speak up and to speak out and to speak loud. There are conversations that you are bringing forward that I believe needs to be discussed in an effort to find common ground. Things such as distribution of the allocation of funding through the city, whether it comes from the feds, state, county, and filters into the city coffers, and how it's properly allocated to support social services and the different departments in the city. I agree with you. There needs to be a discussion on those matters, how the funds are allocated and distributed to make this community what it should be. But I also believe we need to have a conversation about public safety and public health. As it relates to public safety, with the East Precinct being closed, it now takes the response time of Seattle Police Department 3 times as long to respond to calls, 911 calls in the East Precinct area. And while I believe in the principle of community-oriented policing, it's really beyond those persons that mean so well with CHOP to be able to supervise and provide that type of service for a vast, vast zip code and a vast, vast catchment area. So we do need police in the East Precinct so that we can mitigate and reduce and de-escalate matters that come before the residents that live there and the churches and businesses that support and thrive there. But also, in addition to public safety, we also have the matter of public health. As our mayor has said there, and our chief has said, there have been numerous shootings, one resulting in the loss of a precious life. And if public service responders could have gotten in that area, perhaps that life could have been saved. Perhaps you could have patched up the wounds of that young man. Perhaps this would not be yet another life lost at such a tender age. And so as pastor of First A.M.E. Church in the Capitol Hill area since 1886, and we are progressive denomination and congregation, I'm opening up the sanctuary. Everybody needs sanctuary so that conversations of common ground and safety can be held. I'm offering up First A.M.E. Church, which is in Capitol Hill, to hold these conversations between the public safety commissions and the city of Seattle and other like-minded organizations, as well as the organizers of CHOP, so that we can come down to the church and into our fellowship hall for fellowship, for conversation, and for meaningful results. God bless you. God keep you.
Hello, Mayor Durkan and Chief Best and all my community folks behind me and everybody here. I'm with GSBA, we're Washington State's LGBTQ Chamber of Commerce, and I'm also our program, the Capitol Hill Business Alliance, and I'm also a trustee at Seattle Colleges. So Capitol Hill is my neighborhood for so many reasons, and all of those small businesses are connected to either CHBA or GSBA. For me, this is a dark time, this is a frightening time, but it also has some glimmers of hope. It is hopeful to see tens of thousands of people in the street, but it is very frightening when we realize that so many people are coming out. There is so much anguish and anger, and it's rightfully there. It came out of, once again, another murder of another black person, a black man that died. As part of the LGBTQ community, we know about police violence also. We know police violence is real and that the police have a long way to go to become part of a community that is part of public safety and not only about arms and control. This is a time of pride. The history of the LGBTQ community also goes back to a time of riots in the street in California, in Compton, and in Stonewall, New York. It was also our black trans sisters and brothers and siblings that went out in the street. And it continues to be our black trans community and all of our trans community that have a very high rate of violence against them. So we know what it's like to be violent. We know what it's like to have to be in the streets before someone recognizes your humanity. For our black and brown brothers and sisters and siblings, it has been too far, too many years, hundreds of years, and we have to stop waiting for another tragedy before we all come to the streets again. So my hope is the diversity of the people that are in the street, and that perhaps now, when it's happening all over the country, we can start making a difference. For this pride, as an ally with our Black-led organizations, GSBA is certainly committed to work alongside as partners to do what we have to do to make sure there's systemic change in our social justice, in our justice systems, police, healthcare, and education. But at this time, what has turned out is that we're also experiencing a new kind of violence. Now it's not from the police, but it's now from perhaps agitators from other parts of the community on Capitol Hill. As a member of a business organization, and I heard someone say, are you putting property above people? And I want you to know, small businesses are not property. Small businesses are community. They are the employers of the people in the community. They are the donors to the nonprofits. They are the people you see in the street. They have been closed for 3 months. Not being able to close again because of violence right now is devastating. We won't recognize our communities and Capitol Hill if businesses are forced to close permanently, if our students don't feel safe in going back to school, and if our residents don't feel they will get a 911 quick response because their ambulances and medics and police cannot get to their doors. So today we are committed to absolutely stand with protesters, to work for systemic change, but to also work against violence so that we can all have our voices heard, work in community, demand systemic change, make sure it is actually implemented, and then make sure there is accountability to achieve it. So that is where my hope is today. And I thank you all for being here and for all of Seattle coming out, because I believe we genuinely need to change systems that have been in place far too long. Thank you.
Hello, I'm Andre Taylor, founder, executive director of Not This Time. I'm about to have a different conversation with you. I talked to the leaders of CHOP yesterday. We had a great conversation. I explained to them that if you think CHOP is a place, you're minimizing the message. I told them I believe CHOP is an idea. And with that idea, you could take that idea around the country and then around the world. Don't minimize the idea of CHOP. Don't make it be a place. I think it's bigger than a place. We agreed to some terms that if I could get them a meeting with the mayor, they can propose their acts to the mayor. That meeting was supposed to take place at 11 o'clock this morning. Well, I believe agitators learned about the meeting and they got into the ear of CHOP and they didn't show up. I explained to them yesterday that the situation has gone south, and my feelings about the situation is that things will get worse. And last night was a manifestation of what I talked to them about. I told them that, do you realize the danger of this space? Are you willing to die? I told them that I've been in the streets before. I've been around killers. I've been around people that are psychopaths. I faced the federal government. Are you willing to die? And not only are you willing to die, are you willing to take the responsibility of someone that dies on your watch? You're going to be held accountable for that. And I told them the reason why I'm involved, while everything was peaceful, I never said anything. I applauded them, and I continue to applaud them. But when violence enters in, and when you're doing what you're doing because of violence, but then when violence enters in, it kind of overshadows your message. And then what it does, when it's a continual amount of violence, it puts the mayor in a place of, is my responsibility just to CHOP or to the city of Seattle? Do I have a responsibility to make sure if there is violence, and I'm explaining this to them, and I don't act, how does that make me look? I said they're gonna have to act because of the violence. I said, and all the support that you had, they're gonna walk away from you because they don't wanna be associated with violence. And if this space is creating and drawing violence to it, then that means it's over. Get the meeting with the mayor, leave with something that you're going to distribute amongst the community, and you will be viewed as champions, is what I told them yesterday. It's unfortunate that they did not show. I feel like I can't help the situation now because of the violence that will probably continue tonight. I went down there today and spoke to a lot of them. Just a lot of people that were just there, and explained to them the same frustration that I was explaining to the leaders of CHOP yesterday. And I told them, I think it's best for you not to be here in the evening time. And so I just want to say to those leaders that I spoke with that there's still an opportunity. Agitators are going to cost you to be responsible for a lot of people if something has to happen. Because if I put myself in the mayor's position, I have to act when violence is around. I have to. So you still have an opportunity. I'm available. And I want to see most of all that you are safe during this process. And remember, CHOP is not a place. It's an idea. Thank you.
Thank you all for your words and for your presence. Thanks, Chief, for your words. And I think the Chief or I can take Q&A if there's other people that they're addressed to as you're being moderator.
Yes, thank you, Mayor. We have a handful of folks online who have RSVP'd, as well as folks in the room here today. So, Mayor, I'm going to turn it over to you to call on a few folks in the room, and we'll go over to
2 in the room, 2 on the line, like usual. All right, Matt, you got there first.
Madam Mayor, Chief Best, can you explain more about the evening situation? Was there a request to have a curfew at 8 p.m. starting tonight, and the people in CHOP would leave and to return at 8 a.m. in the morning?
I don't believe there's been a request for a curfew. I have read that there has been some people in CHOP have said that they want the hours to be 8 to 8. I think going back a few days when the chief and I talked, both Chief Scoggins and Chief Best, I made it very clear, and their expectation was the same. There should be no place in Seattle that Seattle Fire Department and Seattle Police Department can't go. And That has been our intent and will be our intent. And you saw the police did respond, but they were met hostilely by the crowd. The chief then has taken some other operational strategies, but we have to make sure that any resident or any business or any visitor to Seattle that calls for help gets the help they need. And so that is going to be the primary emphasis for the chief of police, the fire chief, and myself. Erica?
Police could have gotten inside. But my understanding is that he was gone by the time that official police arrived and was at the hospital. So I guess I'm wondering about both that and the kind of implication that if this legislation hadn't passed, the shooting victims' lives can be saved. I just don't follow.
So I didn't imply that he could be saved. I said it's very tragic that he died. And as a mother of a 19-year-old boy, I can't imagine the grief that his mother is feeling. I read that he had just graduated from high school and then met this death. And we've released the timeline in terms of when the call was made, when fire was able to respond, when police were able to respond. I think Reverend Anderson spoke the hope that we all have, that any life could be saved. So I don't think anyone was contradicting what the facts are, but it's a bigger existential issue. We have to stop the gun violence everywhere in Seattle, but in this area, there has been too much gun violence, and we have to take steps to stop that. Chief, do you want to add anything to that?
Actually, Mayor, I think you covered it quite well.
Well, you made a different comment, though, Chief Best, about...
We're going to go to another. We've got, that's like 3 questions, and we've got a lot of people on the phone. 2 on the phone.
Thank you, Mayor. Our first question will be from Paige Browning, KUOW, followed by David Gutman, Seattle Times. Paige, the floor is yours.
I think, Paige, we couldn't hear you, but I think your question was, when is the East Precinct reopening? I think the chief right now has been making operational plans on how to do that in a phased way and safe way, and it's going to be in coordination with the other ways we're trying to reduce what's occurring right now in that area of Capitol Hill. Do you want to add to that?
You know, it really is kind of what she said, but we don't have a specific date. We want to make sure that whatever happens, that we do it safely and consider the safety of everybody involved. And so we're working on that right now with a lot of folks. As you know, as Andre Taylor mentioned, he's been down there talking to some of the folks. We've had other city personnel talking to some of the people in the area. It's quite an eclectic group. And so we're trying to make sure that whatever we do, we're able to do so safely, which is one of the reasons that I would hope that we could go back to the temporary restraining order that was issued by Judge Jones, that is, because if there was a circumstance where, you know, we did have to do dispersal, we do want to be able, under extreme circumstances, to be allowed to do that in alignment with the temporary restraining order. The last thing we want is for anybody to be harmed. But right now, the way things exist, you know, what officers have are their riot batons and their handguns. And that is not sufficient, and that's not the way we're going to respond to these situations. So we're looking for ways that we can minimize any dangerous parts of this, but also have the officers be able to respond from the precinct. As was mentioned by many of community members here, the police officers need to be able to provide service to the 100,000 calls or so that we get a year in the east part of the city. So that's really where it stands.
I would just want to add to that page. I think that one thing that is also relevant to that is, you know, again, in so many of the community conversations that the chief and I have had in the last several weeks, is the real emphasis and need from community for us to be able to look at resources other than police to resolve a range of community conflict. And we have been very fortunate to be able to partner with some of our community organizations in the last few days, including Not This Time with Andre Taylor, but we also have Community Passageways, and we're working with other Black-led organizations to go into that area of Capitol Hill and to really urge people to understand and appreciate that what has happened in the last 4 days, and in fact the deteriorating conditions in the last week, detracts from and undermines the message, and that it is time to restore order and eliminate the violence in Capitol Hill.
Thank you, Mayor. Our next question will be from David Gutman, Seattle Times. David, the floor is yours.
Yeah, thank you, Mayor. You know, you've talked about the steps are going to occur to reduce what's happening, you know, in the nighttime in Capitol Hill. What is going to happen this evening or tomorrow night are you going to clear people out of there? There's dozens of tents that are in the area. Are you going to send in police or navigation teams to clear those out? If people don't voluntarily leave the area at 8 p.m., what's going to happen?
So it's going to be a range of things, David. I've said to piece it together is, again, I think we've seen across the country and in Seattle, it would not be an effective strategy to simply send police in to try to clear the area. And so instead what we're doing is we're working with Black-led organizations and some of our partners in de-escalation to have them go in to communicate with people, to get people to leave or reduce their presence, to reduce all presence overnight. We've had the Human Services Division giving outreach to people experiencing homelessness so we can get anyone there who's homeless actually into services. We've worked with King County, so we have a range of resources to provide to those people. And we will continue to provide a range of those services by city employees and our community partners. As we do that, we are hopeful and confident that the organizations that are in there that believe they can make a difference will reduce the number of people and the disorder in the area, and that we will then be able to go in with our partners in the community and the city to restore, remove the barriers, clean up, clean graffiti, and the like. I think Louise spoke very, eloquently about the impacts on Capitol Hill. I talked to many small business owners that literally have just been holding on. It was their week to reopen, and their businesses are sanctuary for many people, including the LGBT community. They're not only closed, but there's graffiti with homophobic slurs written on their buildings. That's not who we are in Seattle, and we're going to do everything we can to change that dynamic.
Thank you. So, last summer we saw gun violence in Calumet. We've seen it in the area nearly every summer. So, what makes this year different? Why should people see the violence happening now and not connected to the same street violence we've seen around the nightlife in the past years?
I think first, the investigations are ongoing, and we don't know yet what the exact causes of this gun violence are. And I think it's one reason I mentioned what's happening in cities across America. And we regularly see gun violence go up this time of year. But I think that the gun violence permeated an area that was supposed to be a peaceful collection of people whose voice was being raised against violence against Black people. And so while the causes may be the causes we see in this city and cities across America regularly, the impacts are different, and the additional difference is because of the people who were there and how they greeted fire and police. Our first responders were not able to get to the area safely and quickly. And if that continues, to Erica's point, we don't know what the outcome would have been for the young man that died or the person who's still in critical condition at Harborview. But it is our experience over years that the quickness of the response decides who lives and dies sometimes. And we are a city that is one of the leading cities in America for quick responses by our first responders. So those are some of the differences.
Hi.
Hi.
This is for the fire chief. I think a lot of folks were surprised that the fire department has a policy of not moving into a situation before police have secured the area. And I think while maybe it was a surprise that folks weren't happy to see police at the scene in Capitol Hill, that they may have let in firefighters or medics with the fire department to help save a life. Can you speak to that? How long has that been the policy? And is that, in general, the policy across the country? Is that unusual at all?
Sure. Good afternoon. My name is Harold Scoggins. That is not an unusual policy for the fire service. Over the last 12 months, we've responded to almost 300 scenes of violence here in the city, from shootings to stabbings to assaults. That's our policy on every single one of those responses. It is not our goal to put firefighters in harm's way so they can't do their job. So that is nothing new. We also did a lot of work on the ground. Over the last week, we met with the EMS staff. We dropped them off what we call mega movers, where you can put a person on and meet us at a rendezvous point. We talked to them about the operations because the situation could occur. And I did have an opportunity to listen to the dispatch tapes, and our dispatchers gave very clear directions of where the rendezvous point was that we had talked about. But this has been a long-standing policy. You have to imagine our firefighters aren't equipped to deal with people with guns, handguns, and rifles as they were greeted with that scenario. I mean, the last thing we wanted to see is what happened. You know, I have a 17-year-old son, and I have another older son, and I have 2 grandsons. The last thing I want to see is another African-American young man ready to live his life pass away. And I do want to express my condolences to the family because that hit me in the heart. But this is a standard practice. We have to put our people in position to be successful. And as the mayor said, I'm so proud of our EMS system. It's one of the best in the world. We have people come and visit all over the world, from all over the world, to learn our system, to learn our policies, to learn our practices. We do amazing work when we can get there in a safe place to do the work. So that's not new. It's something that we deploy on a daily basis.
Chief Scoggins, I had an additional question for you. So for the conversations that your EMS team had with the people on the ground at the CHOP, is this the group of people known as the CHOP medics? And do you know if they have proper training in these medical circumstances? And I also have a question for Chief Best. We understand that detectives are investigating the shootings from the weekend. Considering the fact that the officers had trouble getting to the scene the night of the shooting, will it be difficult to have a full traditional investigation?
So I'll answer the first question. I had not met any of the people before they landed in that space. I only know what they have communicated to me about their certifications and training, and they've communicated that they have everyone who has first aid training to physicians. Do I know who's there at any given time? I do not. Do I know what any of their practical training and experience is? I do not. Some of that may have revealed itself when things really got bad. We fall back on our training. We fall back on what we're disciplined to do. And things got that way, and we didn't rely on that connection that we thought we made. You know, we dropped off the mega movers because we thought this could happen. We dropped off fire extinguishers because there had been fires throughout the space throughout the week. So we knew small fires can be kept small if you put them out there. We've dropped off additional trauma bags and other type of baskets to get people moved out of there. So we don't know their skill sets. We just know what they're telling us.
I thought she had a question. I just wanted to answer a question about the homicide investigation. So obviously, it would have been, much better if we could have had officers come in and secure the scene as we typically do on a situation like this. We weren't able to do that, but that doesn't eliminate or minimize the fact that detectives are still following up on all of the normal things that they could get, that they can ascertain, who might have been in the area, who might be a witness, any video, any other information that we can get from witnesses. But clearly, it wasn't the most ideal situation for them to respond to. And that happens, sometimes, on these calls. But we have highly trained, well-trained detectives that are pulling together information even as we speak. But clearly, we want to be able to get in and secure a scene whenever that's possible. And, that's one of the challenges that we had.
Thank you, Chief Best. Thank you, Chief Scoggins. Our next question will come from Hannah Scott, Cairo Radio, followed by Carolyn Bick, South Seattle. Hannah, the floor is yours.
Can you say whether or not your investigators were able to get into the scene and collect any casings before the area was contaminated, and offer any of the latest on suspects and motives in the shootings? And then to the mayor, when do you expect people to see a noticeable change in the job area, and how confident are you that what you're announcing right now will help avoid another person from being shot tonight or anytime else this week moving forward?
Hi, Hannah. I can tell you that we weren't immediately available to get the detectives into the scene. That does not mean that they haven't been able to go in after or take a look after what they saw and what they were able to get from video. So there is an active and ongoing investigation, the details of which I can't relay all at this moment, but I can assure you when we have an update, I will provide it to you. But they are aggressively looking for any information and details that they can provide.
Hannah, I think it's a multi-prong. I think the messages you heard today from the people here, and then I think that the messages being delivered right now in Capitol Hill is, it's time for people to go home. It is time for us to restore Cal Anderson and Capitol Hill so that it can be a vibrant part of the community. We can still accommodate people who want to protest peacefully, who come there and gather, but the impacts on the businesses and residents and community are now too much. We have to have ability for everyone to travel safely and be there safely. So we don't have a specific date by which I can promise you it's all going to be resolved, but we will continue to work with our community-based partners and the Black-led organizations to let them first make sure they can get in and talk to the people who are there supporting the reason people are protesting in the streets, and call upon them to exercise those protests in a different way in a different place.
Thank you, Mayor. And our final question today will come from Carolyn Bick, South Seattle. Carolyn, the floor is yours.
Thank you. Mayor Durkan, Chief Best, in your opening remarks today, you spoke.
Carolyn, you're breaking up. Can you get to a better place with your cell coverage?
Is this better? Can you hear me better?
Yeah, that's better.
Yes. In your opening and ensuing remarks today, both of you focused only on the gun violence in Capitol Hill, and your decisions regarding community investment appear to have been based on the recent shootings there. But there was another shooting that you've neglected to mention. It was in South Seattle and was the third one in 2 months. South Seattle has been dealing with gun violence for years, and asking for commitment for justice. Why did you in Black communities when the South End, where most of the city's Black communities currently live, thanks to gentrification?
So Carolyn, you're cutting in and out, but I think your question is, why are we responding to these shootings on Capitol Hill, and why haven't we responded to other gun violence, particularly in South Seattle? And the answer to that is we have. It has been a priority of mine since becoming mayor. We've held a number of forums and meetings with community-based organizations in South Seattle to talk about not just youth violence, but really youth opportunity. And how do we break that cycle? It's why my last year's budget invested more money than ever before in restorative justice and intervention programs like Choose 180, and others, community passageways. We will continue to invest in those throughout the city, and I think that it is critical that we, from pre-birth to through a person's life, they have absolutely the same opportunities that everyone has, but it has not happened in our country. And we can no longer deny the systemic racism that has held Black people and other communities of color out of fairness and justice for too long. And unless we acknowledge and admit that, we are giving oxygen and lifeblood to injustice. And so I have been committed and recommit. The chief and I, from the first conversations we have talked about how do we break that cycle. The chief herself has been involved in so many conversations and work with community-based organizations in South Seattle and in South Park and other places where we've seen a disproportionate amount of youth who either suffer violence or are involved in its perpetuation. So I am committed as mayor to not just do what we've done, but to double down and do more, because it is clear what we've done has not been enough.
Thank you, Mayor.
Last question.
Hi. So I have a question for Chief Best.
Okay.
So I thought that the cops were sent into Clear Zone because it was an active shooter situation. Why have you said that crowd control devices such as tear gas and glass balls would have enabled them to get to the victim more quickly?
Well, we didn't know. We thought it could have been an active shooter situation. All I'm saying is that the officers ended up having to retreat from the area because the only tools they had available to them were their handgun and their riot batons. Neither of those tools would have been an appropriate response to being met with a hostile crowd. I'm sure that no one would have expected officers to utilize a firearm, under those circumstances, or to start using the riot baton. Because of the legislation and the way it is written, that is what is available to them, which is why I'm asking the City Council, I'm imploring them to have a public safety mindset and to think about what options are available to cause the least amount of harm or hurt to an individual or individuals when responding. I think Judge Jones, who I hold in high regard, and as many do in this city, when he made that temporary restraining order that really limited the use, we agree with it. We are not opposing it, but we do have to have some tool other than just guns and riot batons to respond to any sort of criminal acts or acts where we might need to move through a crowd. Again, we know there's a lot of discussion about that, and so we absolutely are willing to have those discussions, community-led discussions about what the responses should be. But the council's hasty legislation clearly causes some concern for me personally and for the police department. We have here a minister, Dr. Reverend Carey Anderson, who's more than willing to open up his facilities so that we can have these discussions about how we re-envision and reimagine our responses, and we absolutely are committed to that. But hasty, not well thought out legislation is not the way to resolve a public safety issue.
Today's press conference. If you have any outstanding questions, I encourage you to reach out to us directly. I want to say thank you again to the mayor, Chief Best, Pastor Anderson, Reverend Walden, Chief Scoggins, and Louise Chernin for speaking today, as well as everyone else for joining us as community members. Mayor.
Thank you. I also want to echo that thanks to not just the people standing with us today, but for the hundreds of people I've been able to talk to over the last 2 weeks who bring various levels of pain and frustration and challenge to government. I'm listening. This is a really hard and uncomfortable time, but that discomfort is necessary because comfort itself has been able to perpetuate many of the inequities that we see in our society. And so I want to stand with and thank all those community organizations that continue to challenge me to be better, our city to do better, not just in policing, but in every institution we have that touches people's lives, to make sure that those institutions are lifting people up and not holding them down. Thank you very much.